By now, you've heard about Global Poker, one of the fastest growing online card rooms available in the US and Canada today. So what's stopping you from trying it out? Global Poker is a safe and secure social poker site that uses their own patented sweepstakes model. Signing up is easy. You can use Google, Facebook, or just an email address. You can always play for free on Global Poker, but you can also buy gold coins for additional play, which will earn sweeps coins that can be redeemed for real cash to a bank account, Skrill account, or even as a gift card. Get a free 5,000 gold coins when you sign up right now at globalpoker.com.
Poker Stories is an audio series that features casual interviews with some of the game's best players and personalities. Each episode highlights a well-known figure in the poker world and dives deep into their favorite tales, both on and off the felt.
Hello and welcome to Poker Stories, a podcast brought to you by Card Player, the poker authority, and hosted by me, Julio Rodriguez. This is episode number 132, featuring Kane Kalas. Kane grew up just 10 minutes outside of Philadelphia, and that's where his father, Baseball Hall of Famer and the voice of NFL films, Harry Kalas, worked as the Philadelphia Phillies play-by-play commentator for nearly 40 years. Of course, Harry's iconic voice was passed down to his three sons. Kane's brother Todd took up the family business and now works as a commentator for the Houston Astros. When Kane got to college, he had aspirations to do the same, while also exploring his love for singing, performing in musicals such as Les Mis, Jekyll and Hyde, and Fiddler on the Roof. It was in school, however, that he got bit by the poker bug. Kane climbed to the highest online cash game ranks very quickly and found himself at rail heaven, playing games as big as 500, 1,000 no limit against some of the best players in the world. After Black Friday, he turned his attention to live tournaments and also found success, including a runner-up finish in the 2014 World Poker Tour Borgata Poker Open for $500,000. He also has wins at the Parks Big Stacks and LA Poker Classic, and a few deep runs in the WSOP main event. In 2018, he won the biggest pot in televised poker history, dragging a $2.18 million pot after a hand played with Jason Koon at the Triton Super High Roller Series in Montenegro. Most recently, Kane moved to Puerto Rico, where he founded his own hedge fund, although he does still stay involved in the poker world, continuing to offer his voice to a number of poker broadcasts. Over the years, he has done work for the WSOP, Triton, WPT Deep Stacks, the Heartland Poker Tour, the Hard Rock Poker Open, Poker Night in America, Hustler Casino Live, Live at the Bike, and Poker Go. He's also kept very busy as a singer. Kane has been singing at Phillies games since 2003, but has also been responsible for belting out the Star-Spangled Banner at every home opener since 2016. And in the very near future, you'll actually be able to hear Kane's own album of music, which is something we did talk about in this interview. Anyway, that's enough intro. Here is my conversation with Kane Kalas. I am here with Kane Kalas. Kane, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Julio.
Great. Thank you for joining me on Easter Sunday. I didn't realize when I offered you this time slot that it was the holidays. That's how hectic my life is. You're not too busy, I hope.
Well, I feel like it's probably a similar thing for both of us because I didn't even realize either. And yet here we are. Happy Easter, Julio.
Happy Easter. Yeah, your egg hunt is over, I presume.
Yeah.
You are full of Cadbury eggs and ready to talk some, well, I guess a little bit of everything, given your eclectic background. On this show, we go back to the beginning. So I do want to talk poker. I do want to talk about what you're involved in now, because you're in Puerto Rico these days, right?
I do live in Puerto Rico, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not too far from the University of Miami where you went to college, but still, I'm assuming a drastic life change for you.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, we will get to that, but let's go back to the beginning because you were raised in media. which has two meanings. um, Media, Pennsylvania. Obviously, your father was the legendary voice, Harry Kalas of the Philadelphia Phillies. So you kind of were born and raised in that part of the world, right?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Media, Pennsylvania. Spent a lot of time at the ballpark growing up. My father broadcast for the Phillies for nearly 40 seasons, and I'm actually, as I talk to you right now, I'm in Bryn Mawr, which is another suburb of Philadelphia, close to Media. I was out here to sing the national anthem for opening day for the Philadelphia Phillies, which I've now been doing for 7 consecutive seasons.
I was gonna ask about that because I did see you posted on Twitter your rendition of the anthem. You crushed it as always.
Thank you.
But yeah, I wasn't sure if you had gotten back home yet from that. This has got to be an exciting time of the year for you. Especially now that the talks are over and the games can get started, right?
Yeah, especially this season. There's a lot of optimism surrounding this Phillies ball squad. I'm not sure if it's quite a World Series team, but there's a lot of hope that it should be a playoff team. So yeah, definitely an exciting time of year.
Now let's talk about you growing up. Your older brother Todd kind of followed in the family business. He is the voice of the Astros right now and used to be for the Rays. Was there a lot of pressure on you to follow in the family footsteps?
There was actually no pressure whatsoever. My parents were very supportive of me doing whatever I wanted to do. I will say, however, when it came to professional gambling, they were pushing me away from that a little bit, but they never expressed explicit discontent in it. My mom actually, I think secretly she always wanted me to be an opera singer and continue performing. And my dad just wanted me to do whatever made me happy.
Well, you kind of did become an opera singer, right? I mean, it's not all that you are, but you've definitely gotten in the time, right?
Yeah, it's not what I do professionally, but it's absolutely a hobby of mine, and it's something I really enjoy and take pride in.
Well, let's talk about the voice. Your dad obviously had this legendary voice. You have this deep baritone voice, just like him. Is this nature or nurture? How much of each? What would you say?
Well, comparing my speaking voice to my dad's is quite a compliment. But it definitely runs in the family. I mean, Todd has a booming voice as well. My father's father was a minister, and so he had a deep and booming voice himself. But I will say it's interesting if you followed my father's career from the beginning to the end, how his voice kind of changed. And I think his voice got deeper over time, as many men's voice do as they get older. But I think for him, a big part of it was he was a smoker his whole life, and that gives you kind of this raspy quality to your voice. And it's interesting to go back and listen to some of the earlier highlights of my father calling, for example, Michael Jack Schmidt's 500th home run. He has much more of a tenor quality to his voice than at the end of his career.
Here's the stretch by Robinson. The 3-0 pitch. Swing and long drive. There it is. Number 500. The career 500th home run for Michael Jack Schmidt. And the Phillies have regained the lead in Pittsburgh, 8-6. And the Phillies dugout comes swarming out to home plate.
Did he have the same voice at home that he did in the broadcast booth.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when I was growing up, and I wouldn't get a chance to catch every Phillies game. Sometimes I'd be doing homework or hanging out with friends. But the minute Dad would get home, walk in the door, I could tell just from his demeanor, from his countenance, whether or not the Phillies had won or lost the game. I didn't even need to ask.
There you go. Okay, so what about your voice? When does this come along? Because I imagine there was a smaller version of Kane with with a little higher, squeakier voice, right?
Yeah, for a little while. We don't like to talk about that, Julio. Um, yeah, so the singing voice, when I was in middle school, I went to a very small private middle school, and there was a mandatory musical. It was mandatory because they wouldn't have enough people to put on a musical unless they forced everybody to do it. So I decided, well, if I'm going to be forced to be put in this musicals, I'd never done anything like that before. I'm like, I might as well do it well. So I went and found a voice coach. He happened to be a classically trained voice coach, and I picked it up pretty quickly. I have relative perfect pitch, and I have a big voice, and so it just was kind of a natural thing for me to get into singing. And I was lucky that I started with a vocal coach who had that classical training.
Now, you said your grandfather was a public speaker, your dad obviously public speaker. Was there any nerves for you at all, ever?
Not really. Public speaking always came kind of second nature to me, and I- I'm I'm very I'm a very well prepared and meticulous type of person. So nothing ever really caught me off guard. I was always very prepared and ready for any speech or any performance. Right, I'd say the most nervous I've ever been was probably just when I did some improv, because then you don't really know what's going to
Mm.
happen. Right, you don't have the script ahead of time, and that can be a little bit nerve wracking. To how can you ensure that you're going to put out a good product if
Right.
if if you're actually writing the script, right? Because I'm not necessarily a great writer. um, so that was always very interesting to me. But doing uh, any sort of public speaking or even commentary in poker, right? That's something that never really made me nervous, because when you're doing commentary, especially when you're doing play-by-play, it's really dictated by the action at the table. And to the extent your job as a commentator is for the people at home to feel the emotion that the players are feeling, to be able to relate to what's happening at the table. And I think it's always been, it's always been a talent of mine, a skill of mine to be able to do that. And again, it's not something that requires me to really think on my feet, right? I'm trying to draw from what's happening in front of me and just convey that with my voice and with my words to the people at home.
Right. Those improv classes can be terrifying. They teach you yes and, but they don't tell you what you're supposed to say after the and.
Yeah. So you've done a little bit of improv.
I did some terrifying improv in college. I actually went there a little bit on a theater scholarship. I know you've done some theater. You did Les Mis, Fiddler on the Roof, Jekyll and Hyde. I mean, what about the acting part of it?
Yeah. So I've always really enjoyed acting. On stage, I was always my take on acting was uh, I was always a little bit more of an under actor on stage. So I was better in the dramatic roles rather than the comedic roles, and it kind of suits my singing voice because I have this big classical dramatic sound. But yeah, I've always loved acting, and it's real funny because I kind of had this reputation as an under actor on stage, and then I did one independent film, and I'm like, well, this is going to be my wheelhouse, because in film you really want to underact compared to stage, right? And then I'm watching the thing and I'm like, oh my god, I'm overacting so much. It's so different acting on film versus stage. I mean, on film, just the littlest thing, right? The littlest facial expression just seems so much bigger. And
Right. You don't
an
have to
analogy.
project to the back row.
Oh yeah, exactly. An analogy I draw to that, which I learned recently as I'm working on on an album, is the difference between stage singing or any live performance and singing in a studio, because I started off singing in the studio. I hadn't done any recording before this album, and I'm in there just kind of singing first with my normal, stage voice, and it doesn't sound very good. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to pull it back and really just kind of go with maybe a somewhere in the middle, and it still didn't sound very good. By the end, I'm whispering into the microphone to get this sound, and it's just so interesting that how the medium affects the quality of the sound or of the acting as we started that much.
Right. Well, when it's audio, there's all those subtleties, but when you're seeing somebody in concert, you want to see them strain a little bit, right? You want to see them go for the notes, and it's fine when you're seeing it in live in person, but
well,
yeah,
especially in opera, Julio, because in opera, there are stage mics sometimes. A lot of times there aren't, but the individual performers are not mic'd. So in opera, one of the most important things is the voice projecting and, in fact, piercing over the orchestra.
So tell me about this movie you did, because it's not on your IMDb page.
Oh boy, this was just a small independent film. I had a small role in it. This is certainly not something I'm putting on any resume. I don't think
fully clothed, right?
Fully clothed. I didn't. I don't think it made it very far. I don't think it appeared at any film festivals. But I enjoyed it. I would like at some point in my life to do something a little more substantial with that, just because it's fun. Acting and performing is fun for me. I really enjoy it. It's unlike poker. It's an outlet to poker's a game where the whole purpose of the game is, you're trying not to show your emotions, right? And unlike poker, and investing, right, which is what I do full time now, in performing, you really are trying to connect to the audience and get them to feel certain emotions. I really enjoy that.
That's interesting. Okay, so let's get to the poker part. You're going to high school in Delaware, right? And you decide, I'm going away to school. You go to University of Miami. They've got broadcasting. They've got performance. They've got options, right?
Yeah. So the idea to go to Miami was the Frost School of Music was very good, and also their broadcast journalism school was good. And at the time, my plan was to double major in broadcast journalism and vocal performance.
So poker comes in how?
So I really started deciding that I wanted to play poker for money at the end of my senior year in high school. And it was a friend of mine who was a childhood friend of mine. We played poker in home games, $20 home games, and he was the fish. I mean, this guy V-pipped very wide, but he decided he was going to drop out of school and play poker for a living. And I told him that he's nuts. Right. So he did drop out of school. He went and got a job at Staples, and he basically lost his paycheck every week for the first 2 or 3 months. But then after that, for a couple months, he started to break even. And finally, by the time I got to college, was doing orientation, I caught up with him. I said, "Hey, Ben, how's the poker career coming along?" He's like, "Pretty good. Past 2 or 3 months, I've been averaging $10,000 or $15,000 a month." I'm like, "Whoa, for a 17, 18-year-old, kid, that's pretty good." So I basically said, okay, listen, I think this is something that I could get good at. I asked him to kind of help me, show me the ropes, and teach me exactly what he's doing online. And by the time college had actually started at University of Miami, my freshman year, I was doing quite well. And that's when I decided, hey, vocal performance actually takes up a little bit more of my time than I want, mostly because of the languages involved. I'm dyslexic, so languages are difficult for me. And so I dropped that, picked up theater arts, and double majored in theater arts and broadcast journalism. But it was, I majored in poker, and everything I did at college was just kind of on the side.
I mean, you were majoring in poker. I mean, you had a pretty quick rise up the ranks. What were you doing to build the bankroll at that time?
So when I started on cake poker, and I decided I'm going to have strict bankroll management, and I'm going to play six-handed cash games, and I'm going to grind it up. And so this was around orientation of freshman year. I started with, I think, $300 or $500. And at the end of 2 weeks, I looked at it, and my $500 was worth $556. And I'm like, you know what? This is going a little too slow. So I completely changed course. I listened to my friend Ben, who was doing it at the time. He said the real money is in game selecting heads up. So I went and sat at a 50-cent dollar table and a 1-2 table with, between the two tables, about half of the money I had. And I decided, I'm going to play only guys who sit down with less than a full buy-in and are doing some weird stuff. And that worked out very well. Within 2 months of me starting to play, I was playing Rail Heaven with $100,000 buy-in, the highest stakes poker game that's run online, at least back in the day. Now there's some crazy stuff going on with coin poker and elsewhere, but I was playing with Tom Dwan and Phil Ivey within a couple months of getting my start.
So I found an old 2+2 thread about you, like circa 2008, and it posted some chat log basically where Scott Seaver was trying to figure out who the hell you were, and there were all sorts of wild theories. People thought you were Lars Luzak. People thought you were Michael Phelps at one point, which is kind of fun. Were you keeping it a secret to protect your dad, or?
My favorite was people thought I was, because my online screen name was NASCAR 1949. And my favorite was people thought I was John Force, who is a NASCAR driver who was born in 1949. That was my favorite of the theories.
Yeah, he's likely to be a high stakes crusher.
Right. So the reason why that happened is because they didn't see my, Boosted J and Scott Seaver are pretty sharp guys. And the NASCAR 1949 account actually did come out of nowhere, and literally the first hand it played was at Rail Heaven. Now, that's not because I was multi-accounting. It's because I had a previous account, Killer Intent, that was hacked by somebody on my floor at my dormitory at University of Miami. The guy tried to steal the funds in the account, and there was a 2-week investigation. It was pretty obvious what had happened. Full Tilt reimbursed all the money to me, minus rake, of course. And then they said, create a new account. And so I did. I created a new account, and that's where NASCAR 1949 came from.
Why did you choose that name?
I asked a couple of my friends in the poker community. I wanted to select a name that seemed fishy. I'm like, if you could think of a name, just a stereotypical fish, give me your best one. And I got a couple different options that were good, but one of my friends whose online screen name was Harry DeBang at the time came up with NASCAR 1949, and I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna go with that one.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. All right, so you're playing Rail Heaven. You got this crazy progression up in stakes. Had you cashed out at anything to that point, or was it all just video game points to you?
No, I hadn't cashed out anything at that point. I mean, it was just a couple months into my play, and I didn't really need the money for anything.
So did that help at all? Like not attaching a real world value to what you were gambling for?
Even though I didn't cash out, I would say I attached a real world value. I always understood the gravity of the stakes I was playing for, and especially with the way that I did it, because I didn't do it in the normal way at all. I really took shots. So like I said, I started, the first table I ever played was with approximately a third of my bankroll, right? By the time that my bankroll was, I guess 25,000, I was game selecting 2550 heads up with a fifth of my bankroll, right? But I was being very selective. And then by the time I had about 320,000 in my account is the first time I took a shot at Rail Heaven, right, which is just 3 buy-ins. But in every single one of these instances, it wasn't like I decided this out of the blue where I was feeling good that day. It was like there was a particular player in the game who I wanted to play against, and where I thought that this was the time to take the shot. Some of those didn't work out, and like at one point, I got my bankroll up to about 25,000. Like I said, I started sitting 25.50, and I got all the way back down to 3,000, right? Which is
Wow.
would be devastating for a lot of people, but it was pretty easy for me to simply get back to the 2-4 tables and grind that back up.
Man, I don't think I would have that in me. I'd be like, oh, I guess this poker thing didn't work out. Wow, yeah, that takes, an intense belief in yourself. I do remember when I interviewed you almost a decade ago, you were talking about game selection being one of your most important skill sets.
Yeah, I think if you look at the players who have really made it in poker, 95% of them probably have very, very good game selection. I mean, if you think about it, let's say you're the 5th best poker player in the world today. If you're playing the best, you're rated to be a loser, right? So there were players back in the day who at the time were more talented than I was in poker, who weren't able to make a career out of playing poker because they weren't able to check their ego at the door. I mean, especially back then, there were so many soft spots. It wasn't rocket science or difficult to get into a game with a guy who literally wasn't trying to make money playing the game. He was just gambling. And I would always prioritize that over battling a regular heads up, right? Even though I would, if I thought I had an edge against a regular, I'd throw it down and 4 table him at 25.50 heads up. But I wouldn't do that if there was a amateur playing a 6 max 10-20 game. I would always prioritize that action, and I think that's a big part of the reason why I was able to be so successful then, and why I was successful at playing poker my entire career.
What about Black Friday? How did that affect you?
So Black Friday wasn't fun. I was at college at the time. I had a lot of money on both Full Tilt Poker and Ultimate Bet. And at the time, I had a decent bid on Ultimate Bet because there was a guy floating around who went by the screen name X-Blink, who a lot of high stakes players were playing. The story of X-Blink was really crazy because he came out of nowhere. He started playing the highest stakes games that there were, and he just started demolishing everybody. And everybody
sounds familiar.
Everybody's like, this guy is such a fish. He's VPIPing 90% out of position heads up pre-flop. And at the time, that wasn't a thing. And lo and behold, fast forward to the solver years, well, you are supposed to be defending very wide out of the big blind heads up. And so he was doing a lot of good things. But he was basically also trying to win every single pot. And he didn't really care what his cards were. He was just hand reading and trying to win every pot. So those were fun matches to play against him at nosebleed stakes on Ultimate Bet until Black Friday happened. And then I had money locked up on Full Tilt and Ultimate Bet. Fortunately, I still had money on Cake at that point, which, after Full Tilt, most of my volume in my early poker career came on Cake. And so I still had a bankroll with which to play. And then I had a decision to make, which is, am I going to stay in college and finish my degree, or am I going to, move out of the country to continue to play poker for a living? And I chose the latter.
So would you go, Mexico or Canada?
I actually went to Costa Rica.
Okay, the even further option. And was it smooth sailing right away again, or were you regretting your decision at all?
I never regretted my decision. Actually, the biggest regret that I have, or the biggest miscalculation that I think I made back then, was actually to not drop out sooner, because even though I was playing poker 40 hours a week while I was going to school. The games were just so good back then that I could have really, it would have definitely changed my life at the time to have played 70 hours a week instead of 40. And I was still, dedicated to school. I'm just kind of a perfectionist, and anything less than a 3.5 GPA was just not acceptable to me. So I was putting in the reps at school, and I wish that, I would have realized at that time, because I had thought about it, and weighed my options. But in hindsight, it was pretty obvious that the opportunity that was before me at the poker tables at that point in time was just such a remarkable opportunity, especially for somebody of my age. And then if you look at, the compounding effects of money, what that means for, having a 7-figure year at that age rather than a $500,000 year, right? How important that was relative to learning about the Stanislavski method, which I could do it at any point in my life. So the only thing that was tough after Black Friday was the games actually got tougher because you no longer had the U.S. fish. I read something back then, I'm not sure how true it was, but that something like 30 or 40% of the player pool on Full Tilt Poker was from the state of California alone.
Wow.
Yeah. So you take that out of the equation, and there's just less money floating around.
Yeah. What about live poker?
I didn't play too much. When I was at University of Miami, I played in a couple of, private games here and there. That's actually how I learned to play PLO initially. And yeah, by the time that I moved to Costa Rica, I wasn't really traveling. I'd go to the World Series of Poker every year, which was always kind of like a poker boot camp. It was always great for learning, living with different guys and running ideas off of them, and then playing a couple of WSOP events here and there. But at that point in time, I didn't really take live poker or specifically live tournaments very seriously. It was just something I was doing on the side.
You have had some live success. I mean, you finished second in the WPT at Borgata to, Darren Elias, who a lot of people have finished second to. What was that like? That experience running deep in that event?
Yeah, so that was at a different point in time in my poker career. That was after I left Costa Rica and moved to New Jersey when poker was legalized in Jersey, kind of close to back home. And I decided that I wanted to really see what type of value there is in these high buy-in live tournaments, because I was doing well in New Jersey online, but there just wasn't enough liquidity at the time for me to really have the kind of numbers that I had earlier in my career. And I didn't like that. And so I was planning on expanding into learning mix games to play live mixed cash games, and also expanding into getting good at live tournaments. And I think that year, that must have been 2015, I believe. I was 25 at the time. I think that's the best exploitative poker I ever played in my life, because I went into it with the mindset of, I'm just going to look at every single hand in terms of winning as many chips as I possibly can, because the players in these live tournaments are just making such dramatic blunders that I don't really care about theory at all. And that's kind of the mindset I had for that whole year. And it worked very, very well. I think in that year period, I didn't even enter that many tournaments, but I won a Parks tournament. I took second in a Borgata WPT. I took second in an Aussie Millions event, and I won a small LAPC event. And I was like, this is really working out. But then what happened is I got back to New Jersey Online, and I wanted to be one of the most competitive players in New Jersey Online. And so I started studying a lot of theory. And I accomplished that goal. I basically, was King of the Hill, or one of 2 or 3 King of the Hills for Heads Up No Limit. I was successful at 6 max, both PLO and no limit. And I played mixed games here and there. And I was playing totally different than I was in the live tournaments, in that I was playing a much more game theory based approach in order to hang with the other top regs and not get exploited. And while that was helpful for me for online, it really messed up my tournament game, because then I got back to the tournament and I'm like, well, I know I just saw this guy raise and fold to a 3-bet and show ace queen, right? But I couldn't possibly 3-bet him with the king 5 offsuit. Like, that would be crazy. And I just kind of stopped doing that stuff. And ever since then, I've been playing more online in tough games, or live in big live tough games, and I've had a more kind of theory mindset, and I don't think I've ever recaptured what I had that year in my live poker tournaments, where I was just relentless, where I just had the mentality, I don't care what my 2 cards are. I kind of had that X-Blink mentality for about a year.
Yeah, you see every year there's about a dozen players who seem so locked in, right? It's like they can't make a wrong decision.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's talk about what you've been up to since. We have a question here. The biggest the biggest pot you've ever won or lost. I think yours was televised.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's safe to say that was my biggest one. It was in a $1 million minimum buy-in game at the Triton series of poker, and the hand was against Jason Koon.
So wait, let's set up the circumstances for this game in general. Invite, your decision to play in it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so it was the first time that Triton was doing a live stream, and they reached out to me to be a broadcaster on the live stream. And when we were negotiating compensation, I said, I'd like an invitation to play in the big game, and the big cash game that's taking place at the end of the series. And so that was part of the deal. And because otherwise I wasn't confident that I would be given a seat. And so I basically had been broadcasting the Triton series, which is probably the most grueling broadcasting job in poker. That those are like 10 or 12-hour days.
Those are long days, yeah.
Yeah, for a week. And then it's the end of the series, and then it's the big cash game, and I got a seat. And the lineup wasn't great. It wasn't as good as I was hoping, but I'm like, well, I came this far. I might as well
Yeah.
jump in the game. And I got in there and was fortunate enough to get in some good situations against some really good players, including Koon, and did quite well there.
So let's talk about the hand in specifically. Basically, in the pot in question that was worth 1.95 million euros. You have pocket tens. Jason has ace queen. You turn top set. He keeps firing. Very nice. He rivers an ace, shoves on you. You snap call. What's going through your mind during this? Are there any nerves at all, given what the stakes you're playing for, or is it all just like, I'm about to win a huge pot?
I'd say I definitely had some nerves there. So to break down the hand further, it was Koon opens, Mikita Badziakowski calls. I 3-bet the small blind with pocket tens. This is in a game with antes. Back over to Jason Koon. He basically min-click 4 bets, and Mikita folds, and I call. And the flop, I believe, was 4. Oh man.
I can tell you right now.
Yeah, 4, 6, 7, something like that.
It was definitely 3 babies.
3 babies with 1 gap. 6-5-3. Yeah, 6-5-3. I check. He bets, half pot or a little bit less than half pot. I call. The turn's a 10, so obviously we turn complete gin. I check. He bets small, and here I'm just thinking that Koon could either be value betting an overpair, right? He certainly played his hand like it could be an overpair, but I thought from the beginning of the hand that he was bluffing, and because I thought that his 4-bet size didn't make any sense with really any hand that he'd want to play for value. So I wasn't quite sure what hand he was trying to bluff with. I mean, I thought it was maybe most likely a hand that could flop some good equity because he was giving me such a good price. Maybe a hand like Jack Queen suited or something like that, to try to get me heads up and get Mikita out of the pot and play. I'd never really played with Jason Koon before, and I'm not sure if he knew how I would play in a high stakes game. But my thinking was maybe Koon was thinking he could pick on me because he never saw me in these stakes games, and so he could try to isolate, get me heads up, and then win a big pot against me by either running a play or flopping some equity and showing down a hand. So that's what was going through my mind, and I'm just like, I want to give him the rope to hang himself, and that's why when I call the turn and the river comes an ace, of course I didn't know he had ace queen and was going to value bet. I'm like, oh, this is an amazing scare card, right? I mean, my hand looks like I have pocket jacks, maybe pocket queens. This is. I was very happy to see an ace roll off on the river because it gives him the rope to hang himself if he's bluffing. And I check over to him, and he had a value shove with ace queen, which I think makes sense because, again, like I said, a lot of times there I'm going to have jacks or queens. It was obviously a snap call for me.
So how do you feel after that session's over? Is this a new high for you?
I mean, I felt pretty good, but it's just one hand of poker, so you kind of separate into two different things. Like, obviously, it was a life-changing moment for me, both in terms of the size of the pot and the amount of money in the pot, but also kind of the recognition. But at the same time, I think that recognition part's kind of dumb because flopping turning a set of tens against Jason Koon is not really an accomplishment, right? Beating, whatever player heads up when I'm four tabling him, like, I view that as much more of an accomplishment, or, winning millions of dollars online, winning a bunch of money live, however many BBs per 100 I'm running at online. These are the type of things that I view as accomplishments rather than winning one specific hand or even one specific tournament. So it was really cool, but I guess it kind of changed where it changed the conversation. Listen, when I went to the World Series of Poker that year, I obviously got a lot more attention than I did before. So it was cool in that way, and it was obviously for a massive pot, and it was for very high stakes, and so that was, even though I did sell a good chunk of my action in the game, right, that was still a very, very meaningful amount of money to me. So it was great in that way, but I wouldn't classify it as one of the bigger accomplishments in my poker career.
You mentioned doing the broadcasting, commentating for Triton. You've done a little bit of everything at this point, as far as commentary. Is that something you enjoy, poker broadcasting?
I love broadcasting poker. Back when I lived in the area in Pennsylvania, I used to do just about every Borgata main event, and that was always so much fun. It's something I've always loved to do, and specifically play-by-play, because I've really done play-by-play and color commentary, but I think just with my, growing up with Dad and now with, hanging out with my brother Todd, it's just really kind of been in my blood to call the action, to keep the pace of the game moving, and to really try to relate to the people at home with my voice and convey the feeling at the table. It's something I love, and I would love to do play-by-play for the World Series of Poker into the future. I've never gotten a chance. The World Series of Poker, I've done color commentary, but I've never gotten a chance to be on play-by-play.
I was about to say, I thought I saw you at the World Series. Okay. So, yeah, you've done WSOP. You've done all the live streams, it seems like. Is it just a matter of finding the right gig to lock you up?
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with my availability and where I am, right? Because I spend a lot of my time in Puerto Rico now. One of the ones that I made sure I made it for was the a high stakes feud between Daniel and Doug Polk, and I did color commentary alongside Alina Jod on that one, and that was just such an exciting match for so many reasons that I really made sure to be part of that one and really enjoyed it. Also because most of the hands I've played of poker in my career are heads up.
Yeah, you guys can watch that on Poker Go on demand. Let's talk about your current gig because it's not poker related. I have your LinkedIn profile that came up. What is the managing principal do at your company?
Yeah, so Crystal Oak Capital is my hedge fund that I launched about 1.5, 2 years ago. And as the managing principal, I am the general partner of the hedge fund. So I own the hedge fund, manage the hedge fund, and make all the decisions at the hedge fund on behalf of me and the other limited partners.
So yeah, you're basically just moving money to different investments all day long, watching the screen tick by. Is that how it works?
Yeah. As a hedge fund manager, your responsibility is to make money for you and the partners in your hedge fund. And so the reason why I went this direction is because at a certain point, around 2018, I decided that, with the success that I had in poker, it was much more fruitful to invest those earnings wisely than it was to continue to make more money playing poker, for a couple of reasons. One, because the games had gotten tougher at that point, and two, because of the compounding effects of money invested well. And I've really been interested in investing my whole life. Even the first year I played poker, it was very interesting to me and intuitive to me that the earnings that I made here need to be put into something that's going to be working for me. But I didn't really put in the time at that point because it was much more important how I did at the tables. And that was the case until about 2014 or 2015. And then it started to kind of be somewhere where, wow, my poker earnings are in the same ballpark of the earnings that I can make with the money I've already accumulated. And then finally, by 2017, 2018, it was very clear that however I invested my funds was going to be a lot more important to me and to my lifestyle than how I did it at the poker table. And so I moved to Puerto Rico and I concentrated on doing that full time. And then it was about 2 years after that friends and family started to come to me and say, hey, we'd love to get exposure to what you're doing. You have a very good track record of profitable investments yourself. And so if you ever did decide that you wanted to manage our money, we'd love for you to do that. And to be honest, I always loved, in my poker career, I always loved making people money. So when I played those Rail Heaven games and sold action to my friends, right, there was nothing made me feel better than walking away from a session and telling, my friends and people who trust me and have that degree of confidence in me, because it takes a lot of trust and confidence in someone to basically hand them a blank check, right, and say, I have your action in this game. I trust you to make the right decisions. Or, even more, back in the day when people would say, yeah, you can auto book selling action to me in whatever game you think is right. And that just really means a lot to me, for people to have that degree of trust and confidence in me. And therefore, I really enjoyed the feeling of paying them dividends. And I don't think I ever really lost that. And that's really why I decided to launch a hedge fund. Right. At this point, investing my own assets is where I make my money. It's not from generating fees on managing other people's money. So it's funny because I'd say a lot of the work that I do in my life is the compliance and the operations of managing a hedge fund and managing other people's money. I don't really need to do that. I'm choosing to do it because I love it. I really do love you know, making other people money and giving people exposure to something that I'm very good at, which is making good financial decisions.
Which is something that poker players generally are not good at. Dork Brunson in his book talks about all of the crazy investments he did over the years, including he tried to find Noah's Ark. Like, he legitimately paid money to do that. Phil Hamid just tweeted yesterday about all his investments over the years. But generally speaking, other than crypto, it seems like a lot of poker players are not wise once they have that big bankroll score. Do people are constantly picking your brain at the tables?
I mean, more so recently, right? For a long time,
Yeah,
people knew me as a poker player and not as a money manager or as an investor. And so recently, I've been getting, especially in crypto, I have a lot of people who kind of are reaching out to me periodically on Twitter, like, hey, you know, what are you thinking of the market right here? You know, should I be in any crazy altcoins? You know, that sort of thing.
So let's talk a little bit about the card player top or greatest 50 players of the last 50 years. I wanted to get your opinion on this piece that we put together. This was a list generated by all of the writers and columnists of Card Player magazine. And I'm asking you specifically because I was very impressed with your poker history knowledge when you were on Doug Polk's podcast debating a very similar topic just a few weeks ago. Have you always been a big poker fan?
A little bit. But to be honest, I, you know, really prepared for that podcast, and I made sure I talked to some people who were legitimate poker historians, or as close as you can get to such an honor, and to come up with figure out this information. Because going into that, I couldn't have told you, you know, how good Puggy Pearson was versus Stu Unger. You know, we can see how they did in tournaments. There's more information out there about Stu Unger, and he has an interesting story. But you know, that's all kind of based on lore more than based on how good of a poker player they actually were. And Doug was very clear about what he wanted to do on the podcast, which is deem who the best poker players of all time were, the best, not who had the biggest impact on the game, not who were the most notable personalities. And so I think that required a little bit of digging.
Yeah, we tried to do something similar. Obviously, notoriety will put you in front of people so they can get you noticed in the first place. So that always helps. But we really tried to strip away the outside contributions and really focus on just on the felt skills. I did notice that Doug tend to value the more modern day online killers than some of the old school players. And I appreciated the fact that you were a little bit more balanced in that regard.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think doing that podcast, you know, the two lists that kind of stood out to me as starkly different in that regard was Doug Polk's list. I don't think included any of the really old school guys. It did include some of the you know, middle kind of old school guys, right? Like Daniel Negreanu. But Daniel's list, I don't think included any of the new school online guys. So it's funny when you talk to people from different eras about who the best is, and this is true of any sport, right? I mean, at the end of the day, if you're a sports commentator and you're trying to argue about who the better basketball player is, you know, LeBron James or Wilt Chamberlain, I mean, it's a impossible argument, right? It really at the end comes down to how much you value different factors in the game and how much you are either adjusting or choosing not to adjust for how basketball has become a harder or more competitive game since Wilt's day.
Exactly. I'm not going to ask you for your top 50. We don't have time. But if you could give me a Mount Rushmore of poker players, who would you put on it?
So I think the really amazing thing in doing this is I saw, you know, in doing this on Doug's podcast and talking to a number of people about it, is the ubiquity with which Phil Ivey was number one. And it certainly wasn't 100% of the time, but it was well over 50% of the people, knowledgeable poker players we ask, who's the best poker player of all time? Phil Ivey. And I don't even think you'd get that with basketball. Like, I don't even think MJ would be as strong of a number one pick as Phil Ivey was. And I thought that was really interesting. And it's really a nod to Ivey, especially with, then after the podcast, he's off winning all this stuff at Triton, right, and elsewhere. So
right, exactly. He hadn't even gotten his run yet.
Right, and that was one of the big, points against him. If you could make any point against Phil, is really, well, what's he doing for me today? Well, maybe he was listening to that, and as Michael Jordan would say, that kind of offended him, and he went off and decided to win a bunch of stuff. But yeah, I think that part's really cool, that there is one person in poker, in my opinion, who kind of stands above everybody else, because a lot of people don't realize, who don't have the online background, which obviously was important for me and Doug, because that's where we started, that Phil Ivey is the undisputed biggest winner in the history of online poker, period. And that's a huge, huge accomplishment, because in the games he was playing against the best players in the world at a bunch of different game types. It wasn't like Ivey made all his money playing 6 max no limit. He was playing heads up no limit, 6 max no limit, 6 max PLO, and heads up, 8 game. So I think that's really, really impressive. And then add to that, of course, everything he's done live. But other than Phil Ivey, after that, I have Isaac Haxton, Daniel Cates, and True Teller. And that's my Mount Rushmore. But for me, I think Mount Rushmore should have 5 people in poker, because you got to throw in Chip Reese there as well, just to kind of represent the old school. So between those 5, that's the top 5 I have on my list.
I gotta admit, it bummed me out hearing Doug talk about Chip Reese, because Doug has been around, and I always just assumed, there was a reverence for some of the old school guys, but maybe not. Maybe some of them are being forgotten. That
I think in Doug's head, it was just so much easier back then, and people weren't really trying. And today it's so much harder. And obviously that's true to some degree, but among the top players back in the day, when Chip and Puggy Pearson and Doyle and Johnny Moss were squaring off, it wasn't easy. It was not easy to, they didn't have access to the information that we have now. And people forget that. I would venture to say that there are a lot of players who are very successful at poker today who are very, very studious and are very disciplined. And the reason why they're able to be so successful is because the knowledge is there. They've learned the knowledge. They make sure to study it day in and day out. And because of that, they can go and have success at poker. You put that same person back in the day, if that person lacks the intuition, if he lacks the just ability to figure out these things on the fly, right, he's not going to be successful. And so I view that as a really important skill set to think about when we're talking about the best of all time, because it wasn't until very recently that just kind of regurgitating information that comes from solvers was an important part of being a good poker player.
And I wonder, as the game continues to evolve, especially when we're talking about accessibility of some of these games, if we'll go more reverting to an old school type of player who can find action, either by his personality or for whatever reason. And if that becomes a more valued skill moving forward, rather than just the memorization of solvers.
Well, we've already seen that, right? Probably the biggest earners in poker these days are the guys who have been able to hobnob their way into good private games.
Exactly. All right, we have some rapid fire questions to close it out if you are ready to go.
Yeah, great.
Okay. Did you have a favorite performance of yours vocally?
Favorite performance? You know, I was in Footloose when I was in high school.
That's super fun.
And I played Reverend Shaw Moore. And
you played the Reverend who told the kids to stop dancing?
I know. I was cracking down on the dancing.
You were John Lithgow?
And for me, I'd say it was less vocally and more kind of the emotion of that role. I really, really got into it. And at that point, my dad was getting a little bit older, and he was still with me, but I could imagine losing my dad, and that allowed me to really connect to this father who had lost his son in that role. And so, yeah, I'd say that I was most proud of playing. I was most proud of preventing people from dancing. That's that's what I'm most proud of.
Oh man, that must have been fun though, to see that high school performance.
But now to give a little teaser, I'd say once I release my album, I've just put so much work into this album, and it was kind of out of my comfort zone to do, to do studio recording, and it's gone very, very well. I think people are I think it's going to be very well received. Just to give you a little background on that, the name of the album is High Hopes, and it's an homage to my dad, who, when the Phillies would make the playoffs, he was known for going into the locker room and singing this Frank Sinatra song, High Hopes.
Yeah, High Hopes.
You got it, yeah. And so
High Hopes.
All the songs on the album are based on, songs that my dad loved, that I grew up listening to. It's a lot of the Great American Songbook, Frank Sinatra type of stuff, and it's been an awesome experience. All of the talent that I hired from the musicians, first of all of them are live musicians. These days, almost all albums use computer generated musicians for some parts, generally strings, and it kind of sucks for violin players because they don't have as many jobs. We didn't do that. We went with all live musicians for every single thing you're going to hear on the album, and they're all local talent, and it's really kind of a tribute to my dad and to the city of Philadelphia. So it should be coming out in the next year or so be on the lookout for the High Hopes album.
That's awesome. Go check out High Hopes. If you're listening to this later, maybe it's on Spotify already, maybe it's number one, you don't know. Go check it out if you're listening. Are Pocket Kings your favorite hand?
I'd say pocket tens are my favorite hands.
I imagine.
If I'm sitting in a tournament, I want to be dealt aces, right? But just the hand that has the most sentimental value to me, where I see the hand and I kind of smirk to myself a little bit, are probably pocket tens. Not just because of the Jason Koon hand, but there have been a couple of really big online spots that I've been in with pocket tens.
We talked about all of your shot taking gone right. What about your biggest punt?
Ooh. My biggest punt is probably actually outside of poker. I've had a couple of pretty big prop bet punts, and one of them was a tennis prop bet that I made against another poker player, Clayton Jang, and I thought it was easy money at the time. Clayton was a little bit overweight, and he wanted to learn tennis as a means to lose the weight. Now he's like a lot shorter than I am, right? And I'm not particularly tall, but being tall in tennis is a skill. But Clayton also had never played tennis before in his life, and so we made a bet where we each had 1 year to train, and I played casually, and I was probably like a 3.30 tennis player, so I was already decent. We had a year to train, and at the end of that, we'd play each other. And so Clayton went out and probably put in about 30 some hours a week on the tennis court. And I was training, but I was putting in maybe 8 or 10 hours a week. And I actually used Patrick Antonius's tennis coach in Vegas for my training. And we went out there in the match, and his forehand was just too dominant. He didn't really lose too much weight to the match, so that part didn't play in. But his forehand was just so good, man. So that that cost me $60,000, that one.
Oh, brutal.
Yeah.
Shots at the ego too. What about the best swap or piece you've ever had of anybody?
Best swap or piece. Um,
Anybody come through?
it was my childhood. It was my childhood friend. My childhood friend who actually got me into poker, and I've had the opportunity not to take a piece or to necessarily swap with him, but to stake him at various times in my poker career, and not only because he is a extremely talented exploitative player, but also because he is probably the most honest person I know. That's been a really great opportunity for me because I trust that even if something comes up that we didn't anticipate, he's going to resolve it in the way that is most fair for both parties. And I've done very well staking him. He's currently a very, very good player on Pennsylvania Online, concentrating on PLO. So I'd say staking my old friend Ben is the best I've done. His online name back in the day was Animal 5050.
Oh, I remember that screen name, right? 50/50 sounds familiar. Animal 50/50. Okay. Shout out to Ben. Good luck over there in the PA poker scene. Let's see. What is the talent you don't have that you wish you did?
Talent I don't have. I just recently went skiing, and I can tell you in no uncertain terms that that's a talent I don't have. And that would be a cool one to have.
Yeah, skiing. I mean, it'd be a safe one to have for sure.
Yeah.
I end up pizzaing mostly down the mountain. Not much French fries. Do you have a favorite album?
A favorite music album?
Yes.
So I really love Frank Sinatra, The Capitol Years, because it has a bunch of Frank Sinatra's, best stuff on it. I also love UC Bierling opera. I forget the name of it. UC Bierling opera songs or opera arias or something. UC Bierling's actually tenor. I'm a baritone, but he just had such a fantastic voice. If anybody gets a chance, if anybody doesn't like opera, I challenge you to listen to UC Bierling and tell me you still don't like opera.
I could get into some crooners, but I don't know if I've ever done the opera deep dive.
I hear you.
Let's see, but yeah, put some Bublé on, and I'm all about it. If you could pick the entertainment for the Super Bowl halftime show, what would you choose?
Ooh, Super Bowl halftime show.
Throw some opera out there.
I'd have to go with something a little more mainstream. I honestly really liked the last halftime show, but I got to be honest, and I've missed him ever since his passing. Next episode's not the same without Nate Dogg.
You have an eclectic musical taste, don't you?
When I had my little time where I was into rap and R&B, but yeah, I thought that the last halftime show was pretty good.
What about a favorite movie?
My favorite movie is, and for me, it's not even close between the best movie of all time and the second best movie of all time. Good Will Hunting, wow. Hands down.
Yeah. How do you like them apples? Have you ever met Mr. Damon? Matt Damon?
I actually haven't. No.
Let's say, I don't know if you've ever crossed paths in the poker world at least. Do you have a celebrity doppelganger, or have people ever told you look like somebody, maybe even growing up?
Oh boy, recently it's the guy from Shameless. I think his name is Monahan, Ian Monahan, maybe.
Okay, hold on. Cameron
Monahan, yeah.
Okay, he's a redhead. I could see it in the face a little bit. I could see it. Where do I know this guy from? Was he a child actor?
He was in Shameless, and most recently, he, I think, was an actor in the video game Star Wars. And okay. I had a friend of mine text me like, "Yo, man, is this you on the cover of Star Wars. But other than that, when I was playing in the World Series of Poker, well, first of all, I've gotten Damon before because we were just talking about him. But when I was playing in the World Series of Poker and I got some TV time on the main event coverage, Norm and Chad likened me to what's his name? Never gonna live you up. Never
Rick
you down.
Astley.
Yeah, Rick Astley. Yeah.
Okay, I know where I've seen this kid. He was in the movie The Giver, which was a terrible adaptation of one of my favorite childhood books. All right. Moving on. Headphones on at the table, yes or no?
No. Make it a fun experience for everybody.
What is your most prized possession?
Ooh, that one's easy. My father's Hall of Fame ring. The ring that my father got for being inducted in the Cooperstown Baseball Hall of Fame for winning the Ford C. Frick Award for broadcasting excellence.
That's awesome. Is there like a broadcast section to Cooperstown?
Yeah, so every year one broadcaster is inducted and receives the Ford C. Frick, and my father was given that honor in 2002.
We need to get something similar for poker media. Probably a little young for that. All right. What are you interested in that most people are not? Do you have any weird hobbies?
Oh, yeah. Now, it would probably be super old school RPG video games.
How old school?
Like I really love the PlayStation era games. My favorite game, and I've probably replayed it at least 10 times, is Final Fantasy Tactics.
Okay. I remember playing one Final Fantasy on, I can't remember what system that was. So you still revisit this game?
Yeah, so what I'll do is put certain limits on what I either need to do or can't do in the game, and I actually play it together with my girlfriend. And so for Final Fantasy Tactics, you have a team of characters, and we have to randomize which characters to use in the battles, for example, which makes it a lot harder because you can't just use your best characters, and then you're forced to go directly to the next part of the game. Whereas, they created the game such that you can go back to other towns and purchase new stuff. We can't do that. So we do all these things to make it nearly impossible. And it's just so much fun to try to figure out, how to win under these conditions.
I mean, given how old that game is, you're probably the number one Final Fantasy Tactics player in the world now.
I will challenge anybody in the world to Final Fantasy Tactics if there's a way to do it competitively.
You guys hear that? If you think you got them, let's hear a challenge. I mean, this could be the next prop bet. Do you have any phobias?
I wouldn't. Not that are coming to mind. I don't enjoy like skateboarding and stuff. I'm kind of skiing and like I wouldn't say I was afraid of skiing, but I didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy the idea that it was possible I could get hurt, but I wouldn't say my heart was racing.
You're aware of the risks.
Yeah, but I love contact sports, so I don't know. Maybe it's different.
What about superstitions?
Superstitions. I guess everybody has some minor superstitions, and there are some things that I guess I think are cool or interesting superstitions, but I don't really believe in, right? So for example, I enjoy playing craps, and I won't say the number 7 at a craps table. And so that's maybe it's
you don't want to get punched.
Right. Maybe it's more of decorum or diplomacy rather than superstition there, because I don't actually believe that it affects the events. But
what if you're just some villain who comes in betting, just screaming 7 and betting against the field every single time?
Well, you know what I actually enjoy doing is I'll play craps, and if it's a full table, I'll pick like one guy at the table who just looks like he hasn't been lucky in his life, and I'll bet the don't pass on that guy and see if they notice.
Just throw him a nice shot as he loses. Oh, I won. That's nice.
Yeah.
Do you collect anything?
So I enjoy playing Magic the Gathering, and I do a lot of Magic the Gathering drafts, and I save my cards afterwards. So I guess it's fair to say I collect Magic the Gathering cards.
Yeah, that's a common one for poker players.
Yeah.
Longest poker session.
Mine's probably not too crazy. Probably about 22 hours online back in college.
Winning or losing?
Excuse me?
Were you winning or losing?
Oh, in that session?
Yeah.
I believe I won. I believe I won in that session.
There you go. It's worth it. Do you have a nemesis, somebody you can't beat, or somebody who has always held over you?
Ooh, nemesis in poker. I mean, it would be like way back in the day, but I don't even know who he was, and I don't even know if he stayed around, but I played this guy heads up who I thought had some serious leaks on full tilt. His name was Yachting 49er, and I played him a number of times, and I could just never, ever beat him. So I guess if I had to pick one, it's whoever Yachting 49er was back in the day on full tilt.
He retired off your money, and he
probably.
Yeah. All right. Have you had any near-death experiences?
No. Mm-mm.
Oh, knock on
wood.
Me
skiing last week was probably the closest.
Hey, so it happened to Sonny Bono. When you get into an Uber and they say, "What do you do?" What do you tell them?
I tell them I manage money.
That's a nice short answer. No one's got to follow up for that, right?
Yeah.
Do you use movie quotes on a regular basis?
No. Mm-mm. I'm bad with movie quotes.
Biggest pet peeve at the table?
Time, the amount of time people take to make decisions.
If you had a HUD that showed 3 stats about a person that you looked at in real life, what would you want to know?
We're talking in poker or in life?
In life. Just in life.
Oh, wow. Okay. A HUD of 3 stats for a person in real life. Their motivation or goals. There is some sort of like honesty meter.
That's a popular answer.
And let's see. I think that covers it.
That's funny. I think somebody gave that exact same answer. Only 2, and those exact 2.
Really?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I gotta go back and look. Okay. We end the podcast the same way every time, with a question from the random question generator. Perfect. It's sports related. Which sport is the most exciting to watch, and which is the most boring to watch?
NFL is the most exciting to watch.
For you or for the world, in your opinion?
I mean, it should be for the world. NFL is just the drama, the emotion. I love the NFL, and I don't see how anybody could not love the NFL. And when I'm thinking about internationally, it's not really as big of a thing. What are the big international sports? Soccer? I mean, come on. How could you actually enjoy watching soccer? So I'm going to go with NFL is the most exciting sport to watch, objectively. Objectively speaking, the least exciting sport to watch is golf.
Don't say poker.
It is golf.
Golf?
Golf. I like golf, but it's just not an exciting sport to watch.
Golf. The Masters just happened. There's the highest ratings ever.
Yeah, I don't know what people are thinking. People must have too much time on their hands. It pains me to say that baseball is high up on that list, even though I enjoy watching baseball. It's just such a long, both game and season.
It's a long season for sure.
It's a long game and season, and the highest rating baseball games are the playoff play-in games. that they were doing, and I think the play-in basketball games were like some of the highest rating games too. I think baseball really suffers from there being so many games in the season that any individual game doesn't really matter. And that's what's amazing about the NFL. It's the perfect number of games. Right? 17 games in the season. Every game matters, but it's not the game that's going to decide everything until you get to the end of the season. I just think the whole way the NFL structured it couldn't be better.
They've also fixed the downtime with Red Zone. So I don't know, do they have a baseball version of Red Zone? No,
not to my knowledge. They might.
They should. Inject that right into my veins, right?
Red Zone really came as a result of the popularity of fantasy football, right? Because people just wanted to see when their players were getting a lot of yards or scoring a touchdown, or when their defense was getting an interception. I don't think that fantasy baseball, it's definitely a thing, but it's not nearly as popular, as ubiquitous as fantasy football.
That's true. Oh, I gotta ask, are you a Sixers fan or a Heat fan, given where you lived?
Sixers number 1, and for whatever reason, Utah Jazz number 2. I was just a Karl Malone fan when I was young.
The mailman. All right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Kane, for coming on the podcast and sharing the stories.
You're welcome. Thanks, Julio.
That's it. That is the show. Thank you once again to Kane for coming on the podcast and sharing the stories. You can follow Kane and learn more about his 15 different jobs and upcoming album on Twitter or Instagram at Kane Kalas. You can also follow us at Card Player Media and also at poker_stories. If you like what you heard on this episode of Poker Stories, please subscribe. And if you want to go the extra mile with a 5-star rating and review, let us know you did so with an email to pokerstories@cardplayer.com, and we'll say thanks with a free digital subscription to Card Player magazine. Thanks for listening.